Hi everybody, we wanted to share with you a talk entitled Women, Queers, Immigrants, and Animal Rights. It was originally done at the Montclair University in New Jersey for the Femvolution student club. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and speak. Unfortunately, it wasn't recorded at the time, so we got some requests and thought we would record it ourselves and share with you. So I hope everyone can feel a little bit more empowered after this talk. I know for sure I did when I went to the Montclair University and gave it. So thank you everybody. There are some content warnings for this talk, so feel free to do whatever you need to do to feel okay throughout the talk. So I was born and raised in Brazil, and I came to the US through a political asylum petition, which was based on sexual orientation. Then I became an activist who got involved in many different causes such as LGBTQ, immigration, racial and animal rights. And I say this because, I want to clarify that not only do I understand some of the issues that we're going to debate today, but that I myself may share some of the same struggles with you. So last year, the group I'm part of, Collectively Free, disrupted the Easter Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral to call attention to the glorified and invisibilized animal violence by the Catholic Church, with the speak out followed by chants, "Easter is a time for love, no more shedding animals' blood." The disruption generated huge media attention, and one of our former organizers who got arrested wrote an article in response to our action explaining the reasons behind it. So here's an excerpt from it. One commenter compared our action in the cathedral to yelling fire in a theater, implying that we raised an alarm about a non-existent emergency. But in this case, there is an issue at stake that is every bit as urgent as an actual fire. So to understand this urgency, please close your eyes. Feel comfortable doing so. And imagine that you were born. Instead of feeling the warmth and comfort of your parents, you were kidnapped, thrown into a cell with thousands of orphans just like you. Your kidnappers coming frequently to drop more and more people. And even though you cannot understand a single word they say, you can smell the blood and violence in every move they make. You have no idea what you've done wrong. You're scared, hopeless. You have this deep feeling that your purpose has already been decided for you. You are a commodity, a product, waiting to be used and eventually killed. The screams you heard will forever haunt you. Every night of every day, you dream that you'll be able to run free, have autonomy of your own body, have autonomy to decide who you want to be, and let the world know that you committed no crime, but that perhaps of being born different than a human. So open your eyes. This is the life of virtually every animal being imprisoned, tortured, and killed for human use and consumption. And that's just a very mild version of the true horrors that happen behind closed doors. In farms, either factory farms or family-owned farms, fur farms, fishing industry, labs, and circuses. If you're like me, who really needs to see, real proof to believe, simply go into YouTube and type in animal violence farms, humane myth, humane farms, fishing industry investigation, which by the way, the fishing industry is just as dirty as animal agriculture industry. I'm not here to show you these footages. This is something you should do on your own. The discussion of animal rights is usually not an easy and comfortable one to have because it challenges something that we all have at some extent, and I want to make that very clear, and that is human supremacy. So human supremacy creates a form of discrimination called speciesism, which is systemic violence against non-human animals and particularly benefits white supremacy, as we will see. Tonight, I am not going to debate per se the fact that non-human animals are people, individual. That is like me as an ally, right? Hearing someone debate whether or not a trans woman or man is worthy of consideration because they are just trans, or whether or not immigrants have rights because they are just immigrants. A trans woman or a man, an immigrant or a fish is a someone because it's not their gender, their citizenship, or species that define their status of moral consideration. It is the fact that they're all individuals who exist for their own purposes, individuals who feel. And we know from over 2,500 studies that non-human animals are individuals who at the most basic level seek pleasure, flee from harm, have awareness, feel love and pain, just like human animals. So Xenophanes, who's a pre-Socratic philosopher, challenged anthropocentrism, which is the idea that humans are the center of the universe, basically, by saying that if horses or cows or lions had hands to draw with their hands and produce work of art as men do, horses would draw the figures of gods like horses and cows like cows, and they would make their bodies just as the form which they each have themselves. So the fact that thinkers and institutions in the West depict gods as humans is just one example of how we as a species are placed in the center of everything, and then therefore it is acceptable for us to dominate over anyone else who's not a human. But wait, it really doesn't stop there. This belief is also damaging to other humans, as we use the same lesser than rhetoric to justify violence on human minorities. And as Silko so brilliantly points out, the whites' notion of the animal construed under their white supremacy framework as subhuman, non-human, or inhuman is the conceptual vehicle for justified violence. And she continues, right? The closer you are to a white, cis, heterosexual, attractive, young, able-bodied citizen man, the more human you are. And the further you are from this ideal, the more animal you become. And this leads people like Trump to justify calling Filipino immigrants animals and terrorists, or police officers to justify racism against people of color by comparing them to monkeys, or men who objectify women and reduce them to body parts, thighs, butts, breasts, and animalize them through language. She's a bitch, that fat whale, what a cow, in order to keep the rape culture, cisgenderism, and patriarchy unchecked. Or Zionists who call Palestinians animals in order to keep the apartheid thriving. So let me tell you a little story about me growing up in Brazil, right? And what I learned in history books. So I learned that Brazil was discovered and that Cabral brought great development to the country. What we didn't learn was that white colonizers like Cabral were terrorists. So they committed genocide against natives and brought oppressions like sexism, racism, and homophobia, because it wasn't until colonizers came that homosexuality actually became a crime. So in addition, white terrorists also brought greed and commodification of everything and everyone. So gold, silver, copper were extracted, and obviously by slave labor and sent to Europe. And when is the first time ever of a record of farm animals being brought to Brazil? During the colonization period. By whom? By the Portuguese. So it also started with a few animals, but soon it was requested from João III, which was the king of Portugal at the time, an entire ship called Galga, just to transport cows. Just like that, the breeding of animals in Brazil territory took off. That is capitalism, deeply connected with patriarchy, heterosexism, and speciesism. So why are we not replicating that white colonizer notion when we chose to treat non-human animals like they are inferior to us because of their species? Should we not be challenging what being an animal means when oppressor calls us animals to try and dehumanize us? As my good friend Laura Schleifer says, animals are not the perpetrators of violence, they are the victims of systemic violence. Now, of course, I do not expect you to simply forget prolonged history of dehumanization of minorities by equating them to non-human animals, but rather, I'd like to invite you to shift your perspective and start regarding non-human animals as the allies that they truly are. As Carol Adams points out in her book, The Sexual Politics of Meat, the culture of seeing women's bodies as parts, so breasts, butts, and thighs, for example, is inseparable from the culture of seeing animals as nothing but bacon, ribs, or wings. And this culture is evident in advertising, media, everyday conversation, and language use. So check out this racist and speciesist book called Why Latinas Get the Guy by a white dude that calls it a no BS guide to understanding the allure of Latin American women in spicing up your love life. Throughout the text, Bovinus describes 14 types, or rather species, of chicas, US-based Latinas. It's really more like a full BS guide on how to control Latin American women by reducing them to body parts and by saying that real men must consume meat, literally. It's important to notice that generally women with light skin are seen as appetizing, while women with darker skin are seen as exotic, as many ads demonstrate. And it's also pretty clear on Carol Adams' work, and there's a lot of examples on that. Historically speaking, women and animals have always been seen the property of men. So controlling livestock is what gave men a better control over women, who were unable to become independent. Then women started to use cows as a form of independence for men, becoming oppressors themselves and forgetting that non-human animals have always been the victims of patriarchy as well. But that's an entirely different topic, and it's not as simple as that. There's many variables taking place. For example, differences between women of color and white women when it comes to those dynamics, etc. But just something to point out. And Patrice Jones has a powerful essay which tackles some of the points mentioned, which I'll be sharing as well with you. And also, check this out. One of the biggest anti-feminist industries out there is the dairy industry, which controls the bodies of female-assigned cows since the moment they were born. And I think it's important to know a few things about the cows in the dairy industry. So let's clarify something, right? Cows don't lactate, aka produce milk, if they aren't pregnant or if they aren't impregnated. So what happens is that cows are violated and forcefully impregnated, all for profit, which makes the whole process so insidious. They don't get to decide if they want to have babies or not, nor do they get the chance to spend time with their babies, if that's their will, who are removed immediately after birth. And the pain of a broken bond can be so painful to the mothers that they cry for days, non-stop. They cry so loud that in Massachusetts, people call the police about it. But of course, the farmers told the police not to worry, this is all natural and part of the farming practices. So baby cows are too just another dollar sign, right? Calves assigned female follow the footsteps of their mothers, and those assigned male don't get a chance to grow up, but instead they are crammed into tiny crates and are killed for veal. The process repeats itself for about 4 years, which is just as much as a cow's body and mind can withstand such violence. And by the way, cows could have lived to be up to 25 years. And this is an insidious process. It's not exclusive to cows. We do similar thing to every animal being used as a commodity to humans, right? I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and that shit really hits home for me. The toxic masculinity justifying violence against a lesser than individual, turning someone into something and more, right? It also convinces other women that what we do to non-human animals is perfectly normal. But even if none of this really speaks to you, at least there's no way denying that speciesism and patriarchy are intrinsically connected, and that adding anti-speciesism to your feminism or form of resistance will definitely make your advocacy stronger. Check this article out. So the use of milk by Nazis is actually not just because milk is white in appearance, right? There's an inherently violent connection between animal violence, in this case in form of animal agriculture, the dairy industry, patriarchy, and white supremacy. So white colonizers back in the day and modern control the bodies of non-human animals and use the same rhetoric of control and dominance to oppress women and other minorities. Thus, the symbol of masculinity, and yes, purity, is tied to controlling non-human bodies as well. I was surprised when I saw this article, but I was very happy to see that the author actually included veganism as a form of resistance and as a big fuck you to white supremacy. Veganism destabilizes what being a man and white man mean, and also what being an animal means, right? Veganism can and should be used as a tool to reclaim identity and to fight back. And some of these destabilizations moments can be studied further on also Carol Adams' work. There's a movie that just came out called Get Out, which I highly recommend. There's one scene there that would probably look at differently now that you know this information, right? I'm just gonna say there's someone drinking milk there, which probably is gonna make more sense for you now. So continue on speciesism and its branches. Christopher Patterson points that the association with animality and sexuality can be traced as far as Cicero, who argued in his Moral Obligations, portraying homosexuality as a bestial act allows the homophobe to deny the animality present in all sexuality. Homosexuality throughout history may have had its moments of acceptance, then it was criminalized and stigmatized by religious institutions and white people. So in Jamaica, for example, the anti-gay legislation is derived from the British 1861 Offences Against the Person Act. The sexuality of both non-human animals and human animals are suppressed by society because heterosexuality and cisgenderness are considered the norms. LGBTQ folks sometimes feel fearful to express their sexuality, especially in places where being queer can literally get you killed, like in about 79 countries, or in farms, zoos, and labs. So in farms, there is absolutely no consideration whatsoever to an animal's sexuality or gender identity. They never get a chance to know themselves and express their sexuality. In addition, a queer animal is considered of no economical value to the industry. So a famous case is BENJI, the gay bull, quote unquote, who was rescued from being killed solely because he showed no interest in any cows, but was much interested in other bulls. After BENJI was rescued, he started showing interest in what we think as the opposite sex. So it's totally cool, BENJI was bi. Way to go, BENJI. In Russia, persecutors accused the relationship between AMUR the tiger and TIMUR the goat to be harmful to children by provoking, and I quote, interest in non-traditional sexual relations. By the way, according to humans, AMUR was supposed to eat TIMUR. So in their case, speciesism is intrinsically connected with misogyny and homophobia. And we never learn who non-human animals are. We're not taught to see them as individuals who feel and love, and we never hear their stories. Especially their stories of resistance. Yes, non-humans fight back. But the reason why we rarely hear their stories isn't because they don't exist. It's because they exist in a system built to minimize them. Cages, crates, electric pods, single-file chutes. These are all technology devices designed and used to disempower non-human animals so they don't resist. Yet they still fight at any chance they get. Beyoncé escaped from a live market in Brooklyn and hid in a nearby vacant lot surrounded by high chain link fences. She survived there for nearly 2 weeks until some caring humans brought her to safe haven. They named her Beyoncé because she's from Brooklyn and she's a survivor. Chickens like Beyoncé can now be killed at a rate of 140 per minute in the US, and slaughterhouses can police themselves even more with less and less government interference, making them very efficient killing machines. And that's just in one facility. And the numbers are so big that it's really hard for us to even fathom. 51.4 billion individuals artificially hatched, fattened up, and slaughtered at 42-day-old babies every year globally. These are not just statistics that we have to take seriously, these are lives that we have to take seriously. So Ria Carey, who's the executive director of the National LGBTQ Task Force, says that leadership for me is tied to the question of vision, that desire for wholeness. We can't ask someone to be an undocumented immigrant one day, a lesbian the next, and a mom the third day. Our vision is about transforming society so that she can be all of those things every single day, and that there will be a connectedness among social justice workers and among organizations and agendas, if you will, to make her life whole. This quote summarizes exactly how I feel about activism. So Ria Carey understands that the only way that she'll be able to completely smash homophobia and transphobia is by also attacking the relationships that make homophobia and transphobia strong. She understands the questions like gender, immigration status, class, and so many other issues make homophobia and transphobia thrive. And hint, speciesism also helps those systems thrive. And speaking of immigrants, when we talk about animal agriculture, we have to realize that it is an exploitative industry that profits not just from the bodies of animals, it profits from the bodies and legal status of undocumented people or people with legal history. In fact, the industry in the US could not operate if it wasn't for the exploitation of undocumented immigrants. Immigrants who oftentimes are escaping poverty, violence, only to be faced with perhaps a little less poverty and a different kind of violence. High alcohol and substance abuse, high domestic violence reports, and PTSDs are only a few of the consequences slaughterhouse workers have. And the industry also profits from financially insecure communities that don't have the political power to demand that factory farms, slaughterhouses not be built near their homes. I see a long overdue partnership between the animal rights movement and the immigration rights movement. In the book, The Right to Stay Home, How U.S. Policy Drives Mexican Migration, David Bacon interviews several people in Veracruz and beyond. Here's what they had to say. Granjas, which is a massive slaughterhouse under a different name in Mexico, but very well known in the US as Smithfield Farms, doesn't use concrete or membranes under their ponds, tourist charges. So the water tables is getting contaminated. People here get their water from wells, which are surrounded by big farms and oxidation ponds. Fausto Limon said, the Granjas came in 94 and 95. What we experienced at first was the stench. The air smells like rotten meat. The wind has a chemical smell. I can really describe how bad it smells. At night, we begin to vomit, and we get into my pickup truck and drive until we couldn't smell it any longer. And we all fall asleep in the trunk. Let that sink in for a moment. So why is it important, right, to include anti-speciesism struggles in your fight? One, because it's the right thing to do. My new phrase is, it's not either or, it's both and. So rather than minimizing oppressions, we should be highlighting them. Looking at the past and present of a few movements, let's see how they handled issues of inclusion of other struggles. So let's start with the Indian independence movement. So Gandhi included no women in his original group of 7 satyagrahas, and this created, of course, a deep resentment from many female freedom fighters who put their bodies on the line. And side note, he was also a racist. The civil rights movement, which was mostly male dominant, and the feminist movement, which was mostly white dominant, led Black feminists to create the theory of intersectionality to specifically analyze how race and gender intersect. And let's not forget how the white cis men took all the credit for Stonewall riots when in fact it was the trans women of color who led them. Or the animal rights movement, who likes to pretend that the AR is an invention, that the animal rights movement is an invention of the white, and it imposes its whiteness and pushes people of color away. Erasing such important groups like MOVE from the animal rights history books. And if it's your first time hearing about MOVE, I highly recommend you do some research on them. So do we want to replicate the past, and for some of us still the present, or do we want to do better? I came across a book called When We Fight, We Win, which talks about how the new wave of social justice movements is taking a more serious pro-intersectional approach because they understand the links among oppressions and because they know that together they're stronger. So I want to bring one of my favorite current movements, that is Black Lives Matter. So BLM can teach us a lot, right? BLM at its core is a queer feminist movement, and it has made very clear they will not tolerate being anything less than that. BLM has been a strong supporter of Palestine and endorses BDS. BLM has connected immigration rights, has showed up for native rights in Dakota, and has even marched when a man was victim of police brutality. In addition, not too long ago, the Chicago chapter threw an all-vegan event. Yep, there are tons of BLM folks who are vegan, and I mean organizers. So feminists, I think we can all agree that we want feminism to be inclusive because women are not static, right? Especially when we think that historically, white feminism has pushed minorities away, like queers, trans, Latinx, blacks, Asians, immigrants, low-income and disabled women, and yeah, of course, non-human animals. We want to make sure we advocate for all of them. So why are we stopping at one species is something we really have to ask ourselves and investigate. Is it maybe because we have that human privilege I mentioned at the beginning of the talk and we don't want to acknowledge we have it? Or is it because we enjoy that privilege too much to try and fight for those victims. So here's a little exercise I'd like to make. So every time you think that announced privilege applies to you, please raise your hand. And this is not an exercise to like call anyone out or point fingers. It's an opportunity for all of us to put things into perspective. And let's keep this privilege. I'm using the word by law a lot because a lot of minorities may feel like this privilege apply to them, and in many cases is actually due from society point of view. But I'm trying to stick with the by law. You understand what I mean. So when referring to me, by law, the pronoun it is not used. The law protects me from being killed for food and or clothing. By law, my species membership allows me protection against scientific experiments. According to the law, I'm not viewed as property. So these are 4 privileges we have in relationship to non-human animals we may not even think about, all made possible because of patriarchal ideologies. However, there are minorities out there, especially Black communities, who have had and still do actually have had medical experiment on them. Also, if you want to think about Holocaust, also being viewed as property. You know, women in general may not be by law considered property of men or be seen as property, but we know as a society we regard women as property, right? So just want to make that note. And as we've seen, patriarchy becomes stronger with speciesism, right? But not just with patriarchy, but with white supremacy. When you think about police brutality, mass incarceration, and the othering of other minorities with capitalism by turning some ones into some things, with heterosexism by the criminalization, like we've seen, with ableism by the otherization and devaluing people's lives, with classism, and so on. So our goal with Collectively Free is really to unite the animal and human rights movements, which we've been doing through several campaigns, actions, open meetings, conference, and solidarity work. So I'd like to share a video of a campaign that we do exactly that. If you're not on YouTube, I'm just going to put a link there and you can check it when you have some time. So as far as the plan of resistance for this campaign, which is a campaign against Trump, we put together 3 series of open meetings to discuss the various ways in which the Trump administration was going to impact minorities in our communities, human and non-human. And then we organized a trip to DC. We joined forces with the Disrupt J20 folks and prevented Trump supporters from getting past a checkpoint for the inauguration. We brought attention to the systemic violence against animals in agriculture, oil industry, fashion, and entertainment, both now and going forward under the fascist regime. And our message was simple. All species have the right to freedom, all species have the right to migrate, and all species have the right to water. So when we started to be more public about anti-oppression positions, we got bombarded by mostly white men with questions such as, what does the animal rights have to do with race or immigration? Isn't this an animal rights page? And Ria Carey from the LGBTQ task force talks about her own difficulties when they started supporting immigrants. Why are you supporting these people? Furious queers shouted, probably white. And in Freedom is a Constant Struggle, Angela Davis talks about the trajectory of the Black liberation movement when the connections with Palestine became more obvious, and also the resistance and work into bringing the Palestine struggle. So the reason why it may seem very or a bit far off to you to include the liberation of non-human animals in our work is simply because it hasn't been normalized yet. We rarely see non-human human rights campaigns or movements include anti-speciesism, and on the other hand, we rarely see animal rights campaigns that include human struggles. So we need to change that and normalize anti-speciesism struggles in the media, at rallies, in campaigns, alongside with the struggles of humans. So here are some tips on how you can start implementing anti-speciesism in your work, life form of resistance. So 1, look at the roots. So I've given a few examples of how speciesism is a fundamental layer that helps better understand other struggles and also how to dismantle isms. but dig deeper. Amazing resources I learned so much from came from revolutionary people like Dr. Amy Breeze Harper and her book Sister Vegan, which is ecofeminism, feminism, Black and animal liberation. The articles and Facebook posts by Christopher Sebastian, which focuses on queer, Black and animal liberation, as well as classism, speciesism. Next, you can also follow him and friend him. And articles by AFCO. Join a community that's inclusive, right? So the animal rights movement has a fame of being non-inclusive. I'm not going to lie. There's so much more out there than PETA and HSUS, Humane Society. I promise, right? So there are projects led by Brenda Sanders from Pet Foods that make vegan food accessible to low-income communities, or the folks from Chili's on Wheels who feed the homeless and provide community support. Also Food Not Bombs, Food Empowerment Project to support workers while fighting for food justice, and A Well-Fed World, which is an international hunger relief program fighting for both human and animal liberation. And for a list of more amazing organizations and people, check out our Get Active page. I can speak from my own personal experience. When I lived in Brazil, I didn't have a community to help me connect the dots, right? I was much worried about not being harassed at every block on the street for holding hands with my girlfriends, or actually running away from skinheads when I thought they were going to cut my guts open. That speciesism, or actually any form of oppression that didn't directly impact me, weren't on the list of priorities. So I'm not saying that it was okay for me to pollute the oceans because, oh, heterosexism, right? But rather that if I had known how heterosexism oppresses humans and non-human animals in a much deeper level than I could even imagine, I could have used that link as a form of resistance against heterosexism, and consequently learned more and more and just genuinely care about the animals I once regarded as mere commodities. But it wouldn't have stopped there. It would have opened the door to challenge also the many privileges I had and still have. Other point, think about the language use. Language is one of the many ways which speciesism manifests itself. Voice slurs, chants, posters, and campaigns that use animals to diminish others. So if your friend doesn't want to be arrested in an action, you're not a chicken. Chickens are fucking brave, remember that? Pigs are also the victims of violence, not the perpetrators of violence, let alone cops. Another important point is hold meetings, events that don't exploit animals. So perhaps the most apparent and yet one of the most invisible violence against non-human animals is what we call food. So by holding all plant-based meetings and events, we can directly help the environment, as animal agriculture is responsible for 18% of all greenhouse gas emissions, more than all transportation combined. And I highly recommend the film COWSPIRACY to learn more about the impact of animal agriculture on our planet. Also, the impact animal-based foods have on our own health, right? So all major diseases such as heart attacks, strokes, and cancers are linked to the consumption of animals. It's not a coincidence that fast food places prey on low-income communities, ensuring that there isn't a single fresh fruit and vegetable available in their neighborhoods which tend to be vastly populated by people of color. And I'm not saying that, you know, veganism is gonna solve all the world's diseases and it's gonna do miracles, but it's definitely more beneficial. Side note, also, I'm not ignoring the horrors of the vegetable and fruit agriculture business. It's also disgusting. So I'm going to quote Christopher Sebastian this one because it's so damn good. So he says, "Dear conscious woke allies, I know that eating ethically is an epic task because exploitation is built into our food system. I get that. But regardless of what else you do, vegan will always be the more ethical choice. No, I don't always know who picked the strawberries. No, I don't always know how far they had to travel, but you know goddamn well, beyond a shadow of doubt, that beef is always someone's corpse and dairy is made from stolen breast milk. So my needed to do is just ever so slightly more woke." So good, right? Create actions and events that reflect a common goal. So think about how patriarchy intersects with human rights and non-human rights. So if you're disrupting an anti-LGBTQ meeting and they happen to be serving animals, call that shit out and make the connection. So share a few of the actions where we tackle heterosexism and speciesism. And to conclude, could it be that the system really wants animal rights activists to focus only on fighting speciesism without acknowledging the fact that the same system treating non-human animals as expendable is the same system saying, make America great again, pushing for deportation of immigrants, shooting people of color, controlling women's bodies, killing LGBTQ people, and treating disabled folks as lesser than. In the same way that they want feminists to focus just on feminism or racial justice activists to focus solely on race, let's unite, because when we do, we'll be unstoppable. Thank you.